All right, I'm ready.
Okay. Where do we start?
What's the problem we're solving?
I'm gonna kill that guy for that phrase. Like, we're here for about a week in San Diego, right? Visiting San Diego Startup Week. And we've made some, what do we call it, epiphanies in here, Musho epiphanies. And the outcome of them was him saying to me, Maria, what problem are we solving? I already hate it.
About 50 times. And what's interesting about that is, you'd think you'd only have to ask once, right?
No.
But every time, well, even from my perspective, I would think that I'd be asking, I wasn't asking the same thing every time I said that. Because
Yeah.
I was figuring out what it meant to be solving a problem or to
True.
be exploring the problem that you're solving
Yeah.
and the different dimensions of a problem and, even what approaches to take to figure out what the problem is.
Yeah. So you like conceptualizing. What are we talking about? Are we talking about a problem discovery, or are we talking about customer development? What is our epiphany about, actually? What do you think?
I mean, I think the epiphany is about problem discovery. And I think that customer development is actually the next step after that. So, I mean, when you go through a structured scientific method-like process, which is what customer development is claiming to be, that doesn't really cover your hypothesis generation, right? The scientific method is for hypothesis evaluation.
Yeah.
And I think actually the real epiphany, it was triggered by learning about this process of doing, but I think the real epiphany was even having a hypothesis to test.
Yeah.
If you had a hypothesis to test, I do think that testing it, at least in a non-systematic way, comes fairly naturally. I mean, if you truly view it as a hypothesis, it invites testing.
But if your hypothesis is actually technology that you developed and you're bringing that context into every conversation you have, then everything goes just wrong.
Well, I think that you can still learn about, I mean, that's not the best way to learn about the problem, right? That's where that structured scientific disciplinary, discipline focus kind of way comes in. If you do that, but you're still focusing on, you're still conceptualizing the problem correctly, you'll learn something. It might not be enough for you to take it further, or maybe it will be, or maybe you could have been more efficient, or maybe you could have saved yourself some steps. There's always room for improvement, but customer development is a method.
Yeah.
Right, and it's a method towards the end of discovering and developing the problem.
Yes.
And I think that in many ways, or at least now that I think about it, maybe I wouldn't have said the same thing yesterday, but now that I think about it, the real epiphany was in even having a hypothesis to evaluate about what the problem would be.
Yeah, I would agree on that, because you kind of prime your brain and saw your conversation and trying to lead it to something that you think the problem is. But in fact, you just need to be openly curious and ask people about how they live, what they suffer from, and just with the conversation, with every individual person, discover if there is a problem actually inside there. And any hypothesis will actually hurt that conversation.
Sure, and I think that especially for if you're a founder and you're solving a problem that you're operating in a space in which you have had problems personally, you might still be able to answer the question, what problem are you solving, without focusing on anybody else. I mean, it is possible.
Yeah.
And then, I think to my previous point, but then most likely you'll miss some details that, the other part of the solution space that you weren't a part of,
Yeah.
So it only gets you so far.
Good point. It's actually what we are doing by getting rid of hypothesis is that we are actually expanding our solution space that we are searching in. And because we're expanding it, we actually have better chances to find something that was not there necessarily before or in your brain.
Well, and I think that's the iterative part, right? So I mean,
is.
your customer development, I mean, it might not go the way that you had hoped, right? You can invalidate a hypothesis,
Yeah.
And so if you turn that into an iterative cycle,
Yeah.
as I think you have been in some of your discussions with, with
Yeah.
practitioners,
Yes.
and
Yes. Let's tell the story. I think it so far sounds quite scientific. So I ran this project, right, where we're trying to investigate the potential for commercialization and the pathway to commercialize. And technology is in my mind. And actually the problem, the hypothesis was very strong what problem we are solving, kind of. At least I thought so. And there's been like half a year of reaching out to practitioners in that particular scope. And I would say that reaching out didn't go very well. And at the end of the day, I learned that it's not clearly in there, it's not a burning hair problem. So they're not rushing to solve it. There is something to it, but people usually already address it with something else. And usually, even if that's primitive and not necessarily scientifically correct and leads to some potential faults, it's just okay. They just don't want to change it. Lots of people with whom we were talking about, they were just okay with the things they are.
sure.
So it's not a good problem for a startup to solve. Nobody want to buy anything there.
Okay with the way things are, I think that means it's not a problem.
Yeah, then it's not a problem. Yeah. I thought it's a problem,
Like
but
the,
it's,
in the same way, I think it's important that the words that form the terms that they have some connection to how they're dealt with, right? In the
Yeah.
same way that a lot of a lot of people will talk about their solution, but that concept doesn't make any sense without an associated problem.
yes, and already here I've been recommended a book called The Mom Test: How to Talk to Your Clients, and there the author makes precisely that point. Don't talk about your solution as much as you can. So because it primes people immediately to first support you, even if they don't need your solution at all. And then it primes the conversation into a certain scope, which not necessarily go alone with the problem discovery. Instead, what you need to do, you drop the solution in your head and you go and ask people how they deal with their operations, how everything goes. Is there something they're unsatisfied with? Is there something you want to improve in there? And things like that. And you know what? Then we discuss it with you, and we decided, okay, now Maria is doing new type of customer development, and so it's excellent that we are on this conference. So there are people whom to ask, and I'm coming there, and they ask me, oh Maria, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm developer of that technology. And nothing works, and I fail miserably. And then, yeah, Alex, what was your advice after that?
Well, I mean, you have multiple identities. So in that moment, what you were doing was studying a problem.
Yeah.
And I think there's two elements, because I've seen in some of the projects that I've worked on, it's not even that they are trying to gain some insight of a pain point, especially in like an industrial technology setting. Sometimes just understanding the process with high fidelity so that you can map out, your interface into that process. So again, even without, without a quantitative measure of the performance, or just what are the steps, what are the processes, sometimes even that is elusive to a research team that might not have worked in the facility that they're trying to deploy their technology in, and so that but again, that's not a conversation about your technology or your research. That's a conversation. It's basically, and I think I can't being in the process of doing a qualitative PhD, or at least a PhD that will include some qualitative data collection through interviews, I see a lot of parallels. I'm not talking about what I think the the conclusions are for the research that I'm doing. I'm asking people about their company and their journey.
So you're within your PhD, you are now running set of interviews, and you have a hypothesis in mind actually, but you're not even sure if that's going to work or not, and so you're just out there asking people how they do things.
Well, isn't that a hypothesis? You're not sure if it's going to work or not. That's part of the part of the term,
but
right?
Okay, you are not coming there and saying, "Hey, I have this hypothesis."
What do you think?
What do you think? Or do you really suffer from that too? Or is it really your thing?
And I think it's even more than that. So it's not just, so that would be, that would be the furthest away from what I'm doing would be, here's my conclusion, what do you think, right? Okay, metaphorically.
It's like, and in your case it does sound ridiculous, but in my case
it sounds really ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then there's the middle, there's the middle ground that I also am trying very hard not to do, which would be, well, here are my concepts, what do you think? Right,
Yes.
so even the conceptualization of what's going on, some of that happens. It's that you can't avoid that, and that's the level of the discussion. So it comes up in follow-up questions sometimes, especially. But for the most part, it's about the story, and those conceptualizations that bleed through. It's just to understand the story, and prompt maybe a follow-up anecdote. But but the point is that it's my job to do the concluding and the processing. What I'm trying to get from my interviewee is the data.
The raw data.
The raw data.
Unbiased data.
Exactly.
Yes.
And unbiased in the sense of I didn't bias it.
Yes.
You also want a lot of data.
Yeah, of course. So in your case, because you're initially approaching the task as a researcher, it's relatively natural to adopt that approach. It actually is there already, almost. You still need to control for that.
I think my biggest challenge is that while I'm a researcher, I do feel like I have some relevant experience in the topic that I'm studying. And so I think that more leads to a stronger attachment to my hypothesis than maybe somebody else. And I think when I talk about the process, when I speak openly about it and honestly about it, I don't really expect my conceptualization to radically change. I'm really more looking for more detail and breadth of examples, at least as far as my expectations. But it's important that I not ensure that happens by leading my concepts. So if I
to the conversation,
if I went through the other way, then it absolutely would happen that way.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be validating anything. I'd just be, creating a logic circle essentially.
Yeah. So for you, it's just controlling for not bringing that thing into the picture, into the dialogue. But for me, it actually required a separate analysis that we ran together and switching the identity from actually a creator of technology to just a kind of researcher who is about to create a bigger picture how things work in certain segment, right? And forget about the technology at all. And even to make sure that this new identity would work, we came up with a couple of questions, so we phrased them. So I have already a start.
Well, and I think that it comes from, some, like some of the entrepreneurial psychology or the entrepreneurial motivation, because I've noticed that even when I meet an entrepreneur who, in my opinion, from my subjective perspective, has not figured out what problem that they're solving, I think they still serve as an example that solving a problem tends to be the motivating factor behind it. And what I mean by that is they think that they're solving a problem.
Yeah.
Right? So their action is still, the actions that they've taken, whether it was applying for a grant or investing their time or, whatever commitment they've made to this vision that they have is driven by the notion that it's solving some sort of problem
Yeah.
for somebody. And when, you know, someone like me as an outsider has a conflicting opinion, it's mainly due to like a poor conceptualization of what a problem is,
Yeah.
or what kind of a problem it is, or who the problem affects and how that fits in, you know, the business model, things like that. But, you know, very rarely do you see someone who's like, well, I developed this technology, you know, what problem does it solve? None, it's useless, it does nothing, I have no idea. You know, sometimes though, sometimes people are curious,
Yeah.
especially for like a quick project or a, you know, a hackathon is like that sometimes.
Yeah, but you know what? It becomes actually more complicated when you deal with generic purpose technology, and when there is a whole range of problems that you might be solving. And when I was formulating it, I was formulating the problem as more like a scientist, and very abstract and context agnostic thing. But apparently, when you move to the startups, entrepreneurial vision, then it's no longer counts as a problem, because you gotta go out there to a particular customer and solve the problem that they have, which might not necessarily reflect with some conceptual
Well,
thing.
I think it's the issue of scalability. Science doesn't scale, right? You do your study in a certain direction, and it doesn't, rarely does your study breed an entire field of studies.
Yeah.
And when it does, right, a superstar scientist, I think you could say really is addressing some sort of problem. It might not be a business problem, but they really found a groove that
Yeah.
resonated at scale, and they get 100,000 citations,
Yeah.
you know, and become a. So yeah, I think it happens to scientists too. It's just that most scientists do not specifically require scale.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you know, like a relatively low amount of citations compared to the superstars is viewed as prestigious and, you know, accomplished.
Yeah.
You know, orders of magnitude less than, you know, the leaders of entire fields, because that's rare.
Yeah, absolutely. But back to entrepreneurship. Why is that Why is that important to understand the problem? From my side, I ran, let's simplify things. I tried two different segments. One segment I tried in a following way. I assumed the problem, I built a solution, we built a solution with the team, spending quite a lot of time and resources for building it. And we went out there to our potential customers, and we started to ask them, what do you think about our solution? Without even asking, are you really actually having any problem in there? And there were quite a lot of interest, because, well, people are on the outlook for new technologies, but the resulting engagement rate wasn't that high at all. And I would say that whole part was a big failure that we learned from. Another part, and it lasted for like half a year. Another part that lasted for a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, was another segment where I decided, okay, here I'm doing things differently, finally, thanks to you and everybody else who was in California advising me on that. So there I first went out there, asked people, guys, how do you work in here? Do you have any problems with that and with that and with that? And I had a hypothesis what the problem is, and I proved that the hypothesis is wrong. That problem is actually addressed quite well, but I discovered that there might be another problem that's worth addressing. And what I did, I practically saved the time for the team to build something that nobody needs, to run a demo campaign that's nobody would resonate with, and it's resources of several people already, and quite a lot of time, and just going out there to relevant communities and asking questions that are not biased with your solution and that are not biased with your hypothesis. That's, wow, that makes so much difference. And Alex, you were telling me about that pretty much from the very beginning, right? How did it happen that I didn't hear it? I mean, I did hear it. I tried to maybe talk to my guys, so they would adopt a new approach or they would try to do something differently.
Well,
but nothing happened. Why?
okay, I think there's two things. So the first is that for that market segment that you spent the 6 months, that you throughout that 6 months kept reporting that you couldn't reach them, you couldn't find the people. So
That's true.
you later concluded, well, hey, like that might make it kind of hard to sell to them
Yes,
later.
that's true.
I mean, again, like whether someone else can reach them, because I think the other point, if I recall from our discussions, was that you started by saying they are unreachable, right?
Yeah, there was a moment like that.
Right, and then that evolved, maybe you didn't use these words explicitly, but that evolved basically into, well, I can't reach them.
Yeah.
There are a few
Yeah.
other firms that seem
Yeah.
to be able to reach them, but
Yeah.
I don't have access to to the potential customers. So that kind of makes it hard to, right,
Yeah.
like to learn about the problem, but hard in a way that should make you think carefully about, even if there is a problem in that space, are you the right person to solve it if you
Yeah.
can't learn about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And later already here, I also realized that actually it's a generic and common and very popular advice to startups. If you can work with smaller companies rather than big companies, drop the big ones. The sales cycle is too long. They're usually quite conservative, slow to adopt new things, slow to consider even new things. Just don't go there if you can go somewhere else. And again, I think I even heard that. Was it from one of our founders back in Finland? I even heard that, but somehow.
Well, because since you didn't really know what problem you were solving,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It was hard to say whether smaller companies use it, need it.
Yeah, that's true.
And I also think that, again, customer development is it's an execution, testing a hypothesis or at least learning more around the hypothesis, but it's not the hypothesis generating activity.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think in your case that you didn't really spend very much time at the beginning thinking about all of the, like you knew it was a general purpose technology, but you didn't really map that out.
Yeah, that's true.
You just went for the first one.
That's true. And I mean, even at the beginning, we were trying to hire to the project experienced serial entrepreneurs, and even their hypothesis was not the hypothesis, but the idea about the project was that we first build a prototype and then we go out and sell it.
So I mean, okay. So I think that one of the things that came up in conversation yesterday was that it's very, very easy to view, for example, venture capitalists as a homogenous entity that all have the same identity. And I'm thinking, what occurred to me right now as you're sharing that anecdote is that perhaps the same is being done in that sentence to entrepreneur. What does experienced entrepreneur mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Okay. You know what? It brings us to
What am I supposed to think when
Yes,
you
good-
give them
good
that
point.
label?
Good point. Good point. They're all different.
And what are they though?
And what are they though?
Do you know what the specific
Well-
people that you're talking about, what their background is?
I would say that's when you have founded several companies, then you become a
No.
serial entrepreneur.
What companies?
True. Yeah.
So are you telling me? You're telling me that the guy who founded a series of shoe brands told you that you should just launch the shoe brand, and then figure it out.
You're making very good point. Yes.
So that's what I
Yes,
mean.
yes.
Like, where do these people come from?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings us to another point that I want to make. I feel that here in California, I was exposed so much to so much intense ecosystem, atmosphere of entrepreneurship. So many people around, entrepreneurs, investors, they have experience, they can advise you things, they can recommend you books to read, they can hear you out and say what you do wrong or where to go next. It's quite a lot of support and intense advice in here. And yes, it all can be different, even conflicting, and those are people, they are also with different backgrounds. But because there is so much of that, you can actually start creating a proper understanding of what you are doing. And it's much easier to do it here rather than, for example, back in Finland, where our entrepreneurial ecosystem is not developed that well.
So are you saying that, for example, in Lappeenranta, back home in Finland, that you took advantage of all of the resources and spaces for meeting other entrepreneurs, but that there just weren't enough, so the effect is that what I'm
okay. Alex here making a point that back in Finland I'm a proper introvert and not visiting public events at all.
I mean,
yes,
I
okay.
understand what you're saying. Okay, I understand that it's a relatively underdeveloped ecosystem.
Yes.
And I will give my own, my own interaction with the ecosystem as an example.
Yes.
I'm here in California. I'm doing interviews, and I have, I would say at this point, like 1.5 potential customers to write, technology development grants for. And in our little town in Lappeenranta, with, what is it, 70,000 people, that I only have one.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can
So
choose
here I have
options.
1.5 potential clients, and in Lappeenranta I only have one client. And so the ecosystem, I mean, it just doesn't do it, I'm just messing with you. It is different. I think that
I found the missing attribute here. In Lappeenranta, you have been for
3 years.
3 years to develop a single customer for your grant writing, right? And in here you were
only
2
like
weeks.
only 5 years.
No, but now 2 weeks.
Well, one of them is a repeat customer.
Okay.
So
Christ.
that I got from Lappeenranta, actually, originally. So I don't know.
Okay, our conversation goes that actually entrepreneurial ecosystem in Lappeenranta is better than in California. Guys, let's go all there.
Let's all go.
Let's all go there.
I think the point though is that when you develop something new, when you're developing a new technology or a new product, especially an engineered product, there's a concept of over instrumenting, right? Collecting additional data for validation purposes.
Okay.
And I mean, it's not the same metaphor, but I kind of see a similar concept where you needed to be thrown into an overwhelmingly entrepreneurial place for it to click,
Yeah.
So there are opportunities in Lappeenranta,
Yeah.
and they can be taken advantage of, and there are interesting things happening, but it's a small town.
Yes.
And it's not in your face.
Yeah, it's not in your
And
face.
you need to,
Actively seek it.
yeah.
Yes, and if you're not, for some reason, in a position of actively seeking it, it doesn't get to you.
Not really, no.
Yeah, and here, whether you want it or not, it gets to you.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily true either.
Okay.
I think that here, I think, so you've had 2 experiences in California. One was Silicon Valley, right? And you already have a project in mind, and, that was the part of the reason you went, was to, participate in the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then here, you didn't just randomly come and visit San Diego, you came to visit the startup ecosystem of San Diego.
Yeah, so it's already active involvement.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, I mean, if you had come to the Nordic Deep Tech Business Summit in Helsinki with all the other research to business,
I was already here.
I know, but I'm saying that if you had come to that, it wasn't the same, but that would have been an interesting peer group in
Absolutely.
Finland.
Okay. From this conversation, I can conclude that actually, being here with the clear purpose to engage with that ecosystem actually makes a lot of difference. And if I kind of grasp and accumulate enough of that, I can get back and actually get quite a good advantage of the local ecosystem as well.
I mean, I think it's a thought process that I first developed when looking at American universities. I mean, there are prestigious universities, there are prestigious private universities, prestigious public universities with less funding, but maybe a bigger scale. And so the question is, well, which one's better, right? And so from a prestige point of view, from a selectiveness point of view, your top ranked private university is better. I mean, they accept fewer percentage of their students, and they have smaller class sizes and better faculty and more interesting things happening, and they have the prestige.
Yeah.
But if you go to a especially like a highly ranked public research institution, I mean, there are just an incredible number of things that you can't even do at the other places. They don't have the infrastructure. And then also on top of that, even though they're a big institution, they're really a network of small institutions, and so there's a lot of room for a motivated student at the big school to really do something cool with a high amount of scale if they're just ambitious about it and make the right connections and
That's true. It's
work their way through the system.
yeah. So
It's hard to say for a motivated person.
it doesn't matter where you are, guys. It's important that you are motivated, right? Yeah. Okay. And about ecosystems, we'll talk another time. Thank you.